Blackbeard has this tendency where he comes in at the most opportune moment to make his gain, and leaves everyone else worse off. Especially considering my last video, I personally don't imagine Egghead is going to be any different. But it does mark another instance of Luffy and Blackbeard's fates intertwining. Luffy ended up at Egghead literally through the luck of the draw, the short end of the stick, and Blackbeard even said as much to Luffy last they met at Emerald Down, observing how his path to become a warlord led him to Ace, who would not avoid fighting Blackbeard if it meant Luffy might come to harm through that cowardice. Like Luffy's prison break at Emerald Down helped Blackbeard achieve his ends, I think Egghead will have a similar result. But I also want to think even beyond that. The two will come head to head eventually for the final time, and I think I can actually make a pretty reasonable speculation regarding what separates them even now. We can expect Blackbeard to be defeated eventually, but I want to unpack what that fight may even be about, why Luffy will come out on top, at least in terms of contrasting thematics. I can't even begin to picture the exact setting and full context of the battle at the moment, maybe Marijoa, but hopefully I'll at least be pointing down the right paths here. If even half of what I'm saying turns out to be true, then shit's gonna be interesting. The contrasts between Luffy and Blackbeard don't even just go back to literally their first meeting. There's actually a very interesting moment right before it. Doc Q discovers Luffy to be rather lucky when he eats a fruit that has a 50-50 chance of killing him, and lives. Skip ahead a few hundred chapters and Blackbeard slips under a blanket with Whitebeard's corpse. His crew has an idea of what he's going to do, but Shiryu mentions there's no guarantee. Blackbeard's taking a gamble, and if he fails, they're likely to disband. But the gamble pays off. Through his darkness fruit, Teach took a second power. He ate a fruit that had a 50-50 chance of killing him, and he lived. These moments might seem equal, but in actuality they're radically different. Both crews seem touched by fate, but Blackbeard's crew mentions fate and luck with regularity. They have this deep awareness, likely hinting at a deterministic outlook, taking their gambles but ultimately accepting wherever the die rolls as something beyond their control. The knock-up stream left them below with their goal out of reach, but they accepted that the world is one endlessly turning wheel where they might meet their quarry again. Meanwhile, Luffy is blissfully unaware of his fate. He inherits the will of Joy Boy and Roger, not knowing Roger said those words, nor is he even remotely aware of Joy Boy in the first place. He's not the only one either. Zoro connected to Ryuma as a fellow swordsman, his Shimotsuki heritage, but he too doesn't actually know about it. It's incidental. And I think Blackbeard's awareness of fate goes even deeper. After all, he knows the history. It wouldn't be too much of a surprise if he also knew of Joy Boy and Nika. Yet even so, he frames himself not as the sun, but in darkness. He too seeks enjoyment and revelry. He too seeks freedom. He too seeks... liberation! This term is all the more relevant after the revelation of Nika, but just like darkness and light, the two could not be more different. Blackbeard takes in what he aims to liberate, but what's left is destruction. The first location where Blackbeard is mentioned is Drum Island, where he'd come and ransack the country, deposing a tyrant. But he left behind a hopeless populace, and a king who returned to take the throne that was rightfully his. But when Luffy, the inheritor of Nika's will, came to Drum, he left it with hope. Not only did they no longer fear pirates, but they chose a pirate emblem as their country's flag. And their former king was no longer eager to consume the remains of his shattered country, but was instead broken and left without a dream, though he would come to find a new one later, rebuilding and resurrecting himself after he lost everything. Many of those Luffy and Buggy freed from Emerald Down found a new purpose of their own, but Blackbeard left level 6 in shambles. Blackbeard's idea of liberation is embodied in his two devil fruits, the nothingness of darkness and the destructive power of earthquakes. In his wake, he leaves nothing behind. Luffy's liberation might involve destruction, but it also builds hopes and hearts. Destruction is their commonality, but for one it's part of the path to resurrection, and in the other, nothing remains. Blackbeard's darkness is that which fills most of the universe, an empty void, and that's all he has to leave behind. Where Luffy holds the heart of humanity, its freedom and ability to find joy even after loss, pain, and suffering. We don't know the details of Blackbeard's crew, but they seem to have a lot in life they've just accepted. Doc Q is in as bad health as ever, and his devil fruit only leans into this. Kuzan struggled as a marine, leaving the force when it fell under the control of a man he could not reconcile with, then fell in league with another who wants to destroy it all. The Straw Hats had their own struggles and burdens, but through Luffy they were able to overcome them, not to be defined by their hardship and struggle, but surmount it. Destruction, rebirth. But Blackbeard doesn't seem to think this. I legitimately believe he views himself positively. After all, he supports dreams. The dreams he can never literally have as a man who cannot sleep. But no matter what he says, his actions don't quite line up. Vegapunk establishes that devil fruits are a manifestation of the dreams and desires of people. We can even see their mechanics as a representation of inherited will. When a devil fruit user dies, its ability is passed on elsewhere. Sabo and Big Mom in particular have taken the fruits of Ace and Mother Carmel along with their wills. Even without fruit, there are countless examples of fallen dreams being passed on, with or without the death of the individual. Dreams never end, as Blackbeard says. And yet, he himself took the fruit of Whitebeard. He liberated that dream, and in doing so, it found an end. Whitebeard's family broke up. While they still remember their beloved Pops, so much of his legacy was consumed by others. Marco protects Sphinx, Whitebeard's home, but Blackbeard didn't take in a family. His crew was only aligned out of common interest. Blackbeard's freedom is one that only exists at the expense of others. He keeps slaves, causes harm, and only protects his own when it suits him, being willing to kill Boa Hancock and let his crew stay petrified if it means saving his own skin. Pinkbeard is free to fly under his flag, but he'll never gain any protection for that emblem. Luffy's freedom never impedes on anyone. It may not be immediately, but he always intends to pay back his debts. He may be the captain of the crew with the final say, but he's not its only authority. Sanji has the say when it comes to food, Chopper as a doctor, and Nami's captain of the ship when she's pissed off. The Straw Hats don't need a chain of authority. Luffy's alliances work the same way. Mutual unity, mutual support. True freedom without impeding on others, rather than a mere emulation of the Heavenly Dragons, the freest people in the world. But even as his freedom evokes the Heavenly Dragons, I don't exactly believe Blackbeard means to walk among them, even as he seeks to become a king. His desire for freedom still runs counter to their systems. In response to Hannibal's speech about justice, Blackbeard remarks that he thinks that morality is a waste of time. He doesn't believe in anything except fate, what will happen. If he does know the prophecy, then he believes that the government will be destroyed and the world liberated, and he thinks he's the one to do it. Shanks warning the elders about a certain pirate reeks of familiarity, for he may have given the same warning to Whitebeard 2 years before, and in both cases, it went unheeded. In becoming a king, Blackbeard gets a ticket to Marijoa, where he can destroy the tyrants of the world from the top down. But reducing the world to nothing won't help bring it dawn. If anything, it would just cast the world into a deeper darkness. With Garp as a hostage, and St. J. Garcia not far out of reach, becoming a king might indeed be his fate, another step on the path to accomplishing his dream. Blackbeard's awareness of fate and the supposed destiny he's placing on himself as a liberator is ironically trapping. It's fascinating that this legacy of rocks was first placed into conflict against the sire of Roger. In naming his ship after Zebek, and even taking Fulalead as his headquarters, these may be signs of an even deeper connection. Perhaps Rocks had the Darkness Fruit. Perhaps Blackbeard is his son. If the latter is the case, then Ace vs. Blackbeard is a battle between the children of the greatest rivals in an age past. And it's the battle between two with the chains of their bloodlines. Ace possessed a deep self-hatred, seeking to surpass Roger and overcome the shadow of his blood. But he was trapped by his father as much as he rejected him because he so deeply rejected himself. And in his death, he smiled, having chosen to die for a connection that mattered so much more to him not because of blood, but because of something deeper. Yet Blackbeard may revel in his blood connection, seeing the fate handed to him as something he needs to fulfill for it. In the deterministic world he views, he alone has been given a purpose. But for all he knows, there is so much that he doesn't. How much can you truly know the scope of the storm if you're standing in its eye? Blackbeard might believe himself to be stronger for what he knows, but in that illusion of control he becomes more deeply trapped by what he's unaware of, the view of the reader so certain of what he's missing. But he has to fulfill his fate, or nothing he's done will have mattered. What he wants relates to his perception of the desires of other forces, be it Rock's or the world's fate. Luffy isn't merely ignorant about his fate, he doesn't care. Fate itself doesn't matter to a man who is going to grab hold of it no matter what, because he decided for himself that's what he wants. Determinism isn't something you can eat, so Luffy would never pay it much mind. Opposing determinism is libertarianism, the idea that if free will exists, the universe cannot be deterministic. In having that root word of liberty, it calls attention to liberation. Luffy may be incidentally following the inherited dreams of others, but it's for that he will exceed them. We know it separates Luffy from Odin, Kaido, and likely even Blackbeard. But there's some qualities of his that will place him at the top that I still don't see or fully understand yet. Because I can't say why Luffy will surpass Roger, why Luffy will succeed where the Joy Boy of 800 years ago failed. But one thing I can't help but to consider is choice. Not just Luffy's choices, but the ones of those around him. Of everyone he meets, friend and foe, those he befriends are close, his enemies kept out of reach. Kobe notes Luffy's gravity, his ability to pull others towards him. Whitebeard knew Rock and Saw teach to his adulthood, yet he still insisted that he wasn't the one. His fellow Emperor and Blackbeard's most storied rival has already made his bet. The people of Dressrosa put their bodies in the way to protect Luffy, not because of some grand destiny, but because they like him. So many people have gambled on Luffy, even those against him. If Shanks warned the government about Blackbeard, then they ignored the man of their blood. Though Emu considered Blackbeard as a potential threat, the light he chose to snuff out was Luffy's. And even from their first meeting, Blackbeard recognized him. He chose to target the man who would become his greatest rival for the throne of Pirate King. In doing so, he found Ace, kickstarting a chain of events that would plunge Luffy into his deepest and most painful darkness. But he overcame that like he did so many other difficulties in his journey. If the fate and causality of the world chose Blackbeard, then it's the people of the world, those who look out for him, and those who seek to defeat him, that chose to bet on Luffy.